hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's good to be here. Thank you to all of you that listen to me ramble on about all kinds of things. I really do appreciate it. I've been thinking a lot about this concept I call prickly people. Now, it's not very well thought out, what I'm about to talk about. I'm going to kind of ramble through some things, so please be patient. But I've been inspired by this, I guess, a feeling I have around certain people. And I call them prickly people. So my question is, have you ever been around someone who seems like super correct and they sort of criticize what you do, or you feel like they're critical of what you do? Like an ultra-religious person, someone who has lots and lots of rules, like, don't use the Jesus name in vain, don't drink, don't smoke, you'll go to hell if, whatever. And how do you feel around that person? For myself, I feel like I can't be myself. I have to be very, very careful. There's all these like rules and regulations that the person has that I'm concerned about. Now, it might not be just a religious person. Do you have a person in your life that you feel this way, that you feel you need to be really careful around? Like there's landmines everywhere, and you have to tiptoe very carefully through all their rules and regulations. And basically, they're just really uptight, and it feels really uncomfortable because you can't be you, because you can feel on a deep level that there's this deep, deep intolerance. So I've been thinking a lot about this. I get a sense that these people have a picture in their head that they must live by, they must abide by. Let's call it an ideology. They have a worldview inside that they're sticking to very, very tightly. And that worldview has got a whole bunch of rules that they have to live by. And as a result, they're just really spiky. And that's why I call them prickly people. So I was talking to Bonnie about this. I was saying, like, why do you think, like, why all these rules? Why do they have to have so many rules? And she thought about it, and she said to me, she thinks that they need structure, that they have difficulty without some kind of mental, emotional structure, and that they literally cannot operate without that structure. And maybe, some of these rules and this dogmatic ideology, maybe it's what they need to feel sane, to feel okay. They can't imagine living without some specific, very strict ideology. And I was like, yeah, okay, well, fair enough. That kind of makes sense. But to me, it sounds exhausting. In fact, it is exhausting. I know, because when I examine my life, I've been there before. There was a time in my life I had a lot of rules. I think especially in my 20s, like a lot of different rules, trying to be spiritual, trying to be holy. And I think at one point, I was what I would call a really militant vegetarian. I had so much intolerance for anybody else who was not. I remember once going away to work in a commercial, and I was the cameraman, and I think I was exhausting everybody because I kept on going on about how bad it was to eat meat and how bad it was this and bad it was that. And the thing is, maybe it's bad. I don't know. That's not the point of this story. The point being that I think I was just a drag to be around. It just really sucked to be around me. So I can tell you that I've been a person who's prickly. Now, I might get a lot of shit for having what I just said, because there may be some vegetarians that might feel very prickly, and they feel like, well, you don't understand, and it's not about being prickly, and it's not an ideology, it's the way the world works. And that's kind of what I want to address here. So these prickly people, be they religious or not, or whatever they are, walk around with all these rules in their head, and I get the sense that they're terrified, that they have these covenants inside that they just cannot break. And there must be some consequence that they must feel if they break this covenant, almost like the sin, if they sin in some way. And so I realized, like, they must be terrified. I know for me, when I was, very, very rule bound, I had a lot of fear. And I couldn't explore things in my mind, and I couldn't, imagine thinking outside of that particular ideology that I had, which of course has changed, over time. But there was a pattern for quite a while of this very, very rigid ideology. And what happens is they're so terrified, these people, that they feel the need to impose all of their rules on everybody else. And if they were a leader, you might call them authoritarian. In fact, I'm beginning to think that they live with an authoritarian inside of them who is a complete motherfucker. And so they have become this motherfucker in their behavior. Don't do this or else. And the or else usually comes with, punishment or damnation. And it is like a religious fanatic. And if you call this person like by the wrong name, or like, let's say, the wrong race or the wrong genetic definition by mistake or whatever, they could become enraged. And so I've been really obsessed with this idea that people walk around with this ideology, let's call it a framework in their mind of what reality is and how it should be. And that's where it becomes really problematic. It's this whole thing of it should be a certain way, because that's kind of cult-like. And that's where some very destructive religions, that's kind of what they do. The world should be a certain way, and I have to make it that way. And so this rage that people have when you transgress their ideology, and I just want to go back for a second, because the thing I think is so amazing is it feels real. Like the ideology you have in your mind feels really real. But the thing is, it's a mental construct in your mind of how you think the world works. What's that picture of the elephant, and one person's holding the tail, and one person's holding the trunk, and one person's holding the leg, and they each describe it a different way, which is a metaphor for reality. And they believe that their version of reality is absolutely accurate. The whole thing of the map is not the territory. People get attached to the map, thinking that's reality, but the map is not reality. The map is not the territory. The territory is reality. That's what is. And the map is how we've processed what we think reality and all the meanings we've built, and then we construct this other reality in our mind of how we think things are. So I was thinking about society, because this happens on this individual level, but then I see this pattern happening in society. If you go online right now, you will see prickly people en masse. Like, the social media landscape has basically become hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of prickly people. And it's not hard to sin against someone's prickly ideology. I find when I do some of these podcast episodes, there are people that get upset at something I said. Maybe I used the wrong word, or maybe I mispronounced a word, or maybe because of this, because of that. And it is interesting to me also, by the way, that culturally it's a certain group of people. I don't find so much that the foreigners do it to me, but I do find that people from the Five Eyes countries tend to be pretty prickly about stuff. And when I said sin against the person's prickly ideology, I do mean sin. Sin is actually the appropriate word. And I feel like people, when I look at the social media landscape, and the thing that's so interesting about it, this is not a new thought at all, people say shit on social media that they would never say to your face, ever. Because if they did, they would get punched. They would get hit very hard. So they don't. So they hide behind the screen, and they make up what they think is going on in another person's mind and reality, and they just say all kinds of shit. And any public figure can tell you that it's just this weird onslaught where they just make shit up about you. They react to things that are not necessarily going on. So I feel like people are reverting back to some infantile state. As an infant, there's this phase where the child doesn't think about it, but the child has the experience of that everything is the child's thoughts and their world. There isn't differentiation. They're like massive little narcissists when they're very little, and at some point they discover that other people are individual people that are different, and that other people eventually they realize, hopefully if they grow up, eventually they realize that other people have their own internal landscape. You know, the graduation from me, you know, and they don't have the thought, but it's almost like you are the same as me. And then eventually it's like, no, you're a different thing than me. And then hopefully you have different thoughts than me. You see the world differently. One hopes that by the time you become, maybe it's a teenager or later, I'm not sure, certainly in your 20s, I hope that people start to have a recognition of, oh, you have this whole internal world. You have a whole internal framework, and you see the world differently. But now what we've arrived at, like we've infantilized ourselves or become infantilized, we're going backwards, and we've now arrived at, you're not allowed to have an internal landscape that's different than mine. You must have mine. And the thing is, I'm seeing this with really smart people online. I mean, really intellectually clever people are behaving this way, where they see something that they believe is true that's online. And by the way, a lot of shit is not true, just FYI. They see something and they're so outraged at it. And by the way, it's designed to create outrage. I mean, it's things are clickable for a reason. You know, even the title of this video, Prickly People. I made it clickable, hopefully. That happens on a massive scale and sometimes, you know, to people's detriment. So, as I said, really, really smart people I see becoming fucking savages online. And I'm beginning to think that this clinging to an ideology breeds a certain kind of narcissism. And the question I have, like, you know, is the narcissism, has it always been there and now it's becoming apparent? Or is the structure of social media, is the structure of society breeding it? I mean, I do wonder, you know, if you can hide behind a screen, is it now just that your normal impulses come out? Or is it, in addition, you see other people doing it and you think, well, fuck it, I'm going to do it too. Because there's no consequences to a person online. They can just say whatever. They're not going to get slapped in the face, you know? I know that there's people that say shit about me, for instance, that would not say to my face. Very few people would actually say to my face, and those people probably would enjoy a fight. But they probably wouldn't. I think they should bring back face-to-face social media interaction. I think that it would change things a lot. No, I'm not advocating for violence for anybody who got prickly about that. So that's the thing I wonder about. You know, is what's in there just coming out? Is the narcissism that's already in there just coming out, or is it breeding more of it? And I'm starting to think it might be breeding more of it. With less and less interface with real, actual people, I feel like we're starting to fight the avatars of other people. And I don't mean that they are avatars. I mean, we have a little avatar straw man of them in our own minds. And we're fighting what we think they are. Because understand, right now, the way media works, you get told who to hate. You know, I found that sometimes the people that I'm supposed to hate, when I go and listen to what they're actually saying, I'm like, I don't think I really hate them. In fact, I think that a tiny, tiny section of what they said got taken and blown up and, you know, turned into a straw man argument. But what I'm seeing is this narcissism, the social media thing, it's really breeding or amplifying this us versus them polarization. And everybody's noticed, I'm sure, that there's this massive polarization at the moment. You know, millions of prickly people are absolutely intolerant of the other ideology. You know, our ideology is the right one and they are the assholes. And people ask me sometimes, well, what specifically you're talking about, Mark? Why don't you be specific? And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be specific. Not because I'm afraid, because I think it's more valuable to look at the pattern of these things. When I talk about these things, I could be talking about any number of political parties, any number of corporations, any number of people, any number of whatever. it almost doesn't matter. What matters is the pattern. Because what happens is, let's say you see one political party doing a certain tactic. And now you're focused on just that political party, not the tactic, just that party. So those assholes must be stopped. But the problem is, you may not realize that that strategy you are doing as well, or your party is doing it as well. Now you're lost down this rabbit hole of emotional zeal about how fucking awful these other people are. You know, it's the us versus them thing. So I like talking about patterns because I think, honestly, it's far more interesting. And the reason I think patterns are interesting as well is, in certainly for some people I've seen who have been in cults, it's actually what wakes them up. They start to see, they have pattern recognition. They start to see a pattern where they see a pattern happening in another group, and then they realize, oh shit, that pattern happens in my group. And if you're talking about patterns rather than the specific cult they're in or the specific cult leader, it's much easier for them to match things up. Now, a number of people have been upset at me for calling out this us versus them mentality, which is really interesting. You know, they agree in principle, yeah, us versus them is bad. But they have this thing of, yeah, but, I mean, what we have is right. And what if the other side is doing something destructive? What if they're dangerous? And I go, yeah, but we have to check ourselves very carefully. Because what we don't want to do is fall into cult mentality. In your cult, you may be taught that, you know, us versus them is a very, very bad thing. But when the other is doing something bad, that changes it. Because now we are better than them, and they must be stopped at any cost. And it's not a hard jump, because what happens is there's all this fear that goes on, like the other is going to do this, I don't know, whatever terrible thing. So they have to be stopped. But I believe it's kind of important when you're saying, well, you know, we have to stop them. Maybe it's us versus them, but it's just justice. It's the right use of us versus them. Okay, I can buy that to some degree. But first you have to find out if the information you're getting about the other side is accurate. And that's where I always go back to media on this one. As I said before, it's interesting that the most of the shit I get online is from people who live in the Five Eyes. I'll talk more about the Five Eyes. I think some of you know what I'm talking about. It's almost like there's this programming that people have of what to be outraged about. Here's a what if the people that make the news or approve of the news or are funding the news are themselves prickly people? What if they have an ideology that is religious in its fervor? Is it possible that then you're consuming prickly news, prickly information that reinforces for you, you're the good people, they're the bad people? It reminds me of that amazing section from that film. I don't remember what it's from, where the Nazi soldier says,
Hans, I've just noticed something.
These communists are all cowards.
Have you looked at our caps recently?
Our caps?
The badges on our caps. Have you looked at them?
What? No. A bit?
They've got skulls on them. Have you noticed that our caps have actually got little pictures of skulls on them?
I don't,
Hans, are we the baddies?
are we the baddies? You know, like we don't want to have that thought. And I keep on harping on about this because when you're in an ideology, or when you're in a cult, or when you're stuck in a system of thinking, you don't know you're stuck in a system of thinking. You think you're seeing reality very, very clearly. And it's only when you have some kind of shift in perception and you actually wake up out of that very constrained stupor that you go, holy shit, how did I think that? And I think part of the reason that this these thoughts have been coming up to me is I was thinking about Sinead O'Connor, the singer who died recently. She's been very much on my mind. But what's been on my mind is that she spoke out about abuses a long time ago, and a lot of very prickly people went to war against her. I think some of those prickly people are now hailing her as a hero, but back then, I don't know how many people were backing her. It seemed like the media machine was against her, was trying to destroy her. And not a lot of people stood up for her. Isn't that sad? I mean, isn't it sad what prickliness did? And how do we know that right now, by the way, the thing that we're told to hate, or the person we're told to hate, may not be a bad person or a bad thing? You know, and I think I'm seeing people online are really pissed off about the Sinead O'Connor thing because they're saying, oh, now you praise her. Like, now that she's dead, now she's a hero. She wasn't hailed as a hero back then. Now she's a hero. Now that she's dead. And I'm saddened by it because there's an interesting lesson there. Because let's say that she was a hero back then and she wasn't recognized as such. In fact, a lot of people became flying monkeys to try to destroy her. And maybe then they forgot they were flying monkeys, and now they're like, oh my God, she was incredible. But back then, they did not like her. Is it possible that the ideology framework that we're in right now, we're doing that to certain people? Is it possible? And again, I don't know if that's the case or not, but I think it's really important to look at the framework that you're living inside, the belief you have. Because in your belief, if you're a person who consumes media and news, in your belief system, it is very clear who you're supposed to hate. I don't think personally that the people that run those mega media organizations are necessarily the noble, empathetic, compassionate people that you think they are. They're trying to make money. They're trying to push certain things. And the PSYOP is very, very effective. And those of you that haven't seen the Weaponizing Filmmaking podcast episode, yes. Try and watch it if you can on YouTube, because I show what psychological operations are at the end of that. There are massive psychological operations going on. They're not conspiracy theories. They're actually real things. So the question is, of course, what if prickly people are using media to make us even more prickly? And again, like I said, some people wake up from the stupor and they say, well, I always knew that this thing wasn't bad, or I always knew this person wasn't bad, or this thing wasn't bad, or whatever the narrative was. No, you didn't know. You fell for the PSYOP. So, I mean, what's the solution? Well, I don't know. One thing could be, don't be fucking prickly. Don't be prickly. Like, examine. It's really good, I think, if we examine our ideology, we examine the framework, because we're so sure it's true, and everybody around us reinforces that it's true. And whatever news we watch reinforces that it's true. But being prickly, I don't think it's going to end well, especially with the level of polarization I'm seeing right now, because prickliness can eventually turn into a kind of violence and a level of deep, deep hatred. So maybe the thing is, for all of us not to hold on to an ideology so desperately, which, as I said, an ideology is this vaporous, mind-made theory. Maybe we shouldn't hold an ideology above human beings. I was thinking back to the very beginning of my ramble here, If I'm prickly about something, what if I can actually see the other person, recognize that they have a different worldview, and be genuinely interested in their worldview, rather than the authoritarian inside me saying, no, fuck them, they are going to be like me because I am the better person. Like, I just don't think that ends well. And I think that people do terrible, terrible things in the name of advancing humanity or making the world better, And, whenever I hear people saying, well, it's for your own good or it's for your own safety, that sets off huge alarm bells for me. So I think in the end, maybe the answer is like to not be attached to our ideology as though it is us. Like, what if there's us, this being, and then there's this ideology or these thoughts we have? What if they're not the same? Because when you're little, you have a certain ideology and it changes over time. And I think what happens at a certain point is we think, okay, well, now this is the truth. But what if this is not the truth either? You know, what if this is just the way that we're experiencing the world right now, the way we're seeing it right now, for any number of reasons? It could be because of good experiences we've had, bad experiences. But what if that ideology is just, what if we could treat it like a passing phase? Like, these are the things that I think now, but what if we could be open-minded? It would be much easier not to be played if we could see the ideology not as truth, but just as a construct of our thinking that we're having right now. And as I said before, I'm not trying to say, well, you know, we need to try the other side on because, you know, maybe they're this, that, or the other, and maybe they're good people. I'm not saying that, because there are people doing bad shit. And those of you that know me and know what I talk about and what I've done, I'm capable of standing up against bad shit. And I know what bad shit is. But I'm also seeing a lot of people being led to believe that things are bad that may not be as bad as they're being led to believe. And that's where this prickliness comes in. So, yeah, that's what I've been thinking about. Not holding on to an ideology above humanity. Stay curious.